right, it seems like we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be starting in 5 minutes, so we give some room for the rest of the attendees to join. It's Stephanie here. I'm joined by Robert and Micah. Thank you once again for joining us. Hey, Robert, how are you today?
Pretty good. This is a great topic to talk about today, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Love that.
How about yourself?
All good over here. Excited to have some customers from us, some partners joining us today. So looks like a shiny day outside from here. So looking good.
Nice.
What about yourself, Micah? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, about the same. Looking forward to our event today.
Good. All right. Let's give a couple more minutes for the rest of the folks to join, and then we kick it off. Welcome, everyone. For those who just joined, we're just giving 2 more minutes for the rest of the people we invited to join, and then we'll kick it off. Thank you very much for joining us today. Good morning for the ones in the Pacific Coast. Good afternoon already for those in Central and Eastern time. Just 2 more minutes, and then we'll kick it off. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope y'all are sitting inside our wrist today. It's going to be a good little discussion because we're basing it on real life.
Love that, yeah. Hope it's going to be an insightful conversation for everyone joining us today. We have some more people joining right now. So let's just give 1 more minute to kick it off, and then we can jump right into it. Thank you, everyone. Alrighty. Seems like all set. We're ready to start. So once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time today. This is Stephanie with Synergy Advisors, and today I'm joined by Robert Meyers and Michael Nasa. We are hoping that this will be an insightful webinar for all of you joining us today. We'll be tackling a little bit of compliance and insider risk management topics, and if you haven't ever heard about what IRM is about, we'll make sure to tell you all about this today. We're planning to walk you over a couple real case scenarios that both Mike and Robert have faced in the past, and hope to, share insights, gotchas, and tips from their experience, how they have managed all the mess that can come out of insider risks, which sometimes we overlook as we are mostly focusing on external risks and threats that are coming from outside of our organization. So it's cool that we'll be, getting to talk a little bit more about what's going on within our organization and how to make sure we're mitigating all those risks. So thank you again for joining us today. We'll jump into the next slide to give you a brief intro of who we are at Synergy and the folks that are joining me here today at the webinar. I will not introduce Microsoft because I guess most of you already know what Microsoft is about. If you don't, maybe you're in the wrong place because we'll be discussing Microsoft and Synergy, but I'm sure you all do, so that's great. I'll just jump right into Synergy Advisors, and then I'll intro Robert and Micah. Over here on what you're seeing on the screen right now. So Synergy Advisors, we have been working for the last 12 years in cybersecurity, compliance, and identity. Really what we do is a beautiful mix of security and productivity. So we mix those two to bring a great user experience to all the folks in your organization. What we do, it's really what you're seeing on the screen. So we have 3 main services that cover an entire variety of solutions. So we have our consulting services, which is pretty much how we can walk you over getting to know and getting to understand how to protect yourself from threats on all this modern new malware that we have out there. We cover security, compliance, and identity. Then we go into the second side of our story, which is our managed and SOC services, which is pretty much you already have your card. Just give us the keys if you feel like you might not have the time, the resources, or the skill set to manage what you already own in your cybersecurity stack. And finally, we have our eSuite, which we'll be also discussing a little bit about there in a minute, which is our own set of solutions working on top of Microsoft technologies. We have found very specific use cases around compliance and security reporting and such out there in organizations just like yours, the ones that are joining us today. And that's why we build a couple reporting capabilities on top of Power BI, on top of Teams platform. And that's really what we want to discuss today. We will be focusing today on our eVigilant, and Micah will make sure to give you an overview of how this story of eVigilant connects with IRM and Microsoft Purview. So Now, jumping into the next slide, so I give you a quick intro of Robert, Micah, and myself. There you go. Let's start with Robert over here. So he's a big compliance champion over here and identity as well. He has over 30 years of experience in the industry. So I'm sure, he knows one tip or two about what's going on out there in real situations, right? And that's why he's joining us today from Microsoft. He works directly with Microsoft customers, helping them enhance and streamline their compliance and management posture. So that's why he's joining us today. Thank you, Robert, for being here. Anything that you want to add on your end?
Just that, please, if you haven't implemented some form of insider risk management, please do so. We're going to be talking about a lot of gotchas, a lot of real life. We definitely want you to protect your own company as well.
That is true. That is true. Thank you, Robert. And then introducing Michael Nasa over here. Micah actually came from Microsoft. He used to work there. He started there, and then he moved to Synergy to start managing our entire services in the US and across the Americas. Micah, later in time, he started becoming a compliance winner as well, just as Robert. He's one of our compliance architects nowadays, works with most of our customers, helping them out in plan their data governance and protection strategies from a compliance standpoint. So thank you, Micah, for joining us today. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Thank you, Stephanie. Nothing to add, just looking forward to chatting with the folks about IRM today.
Love that. Very good. And finally, this is Stephanie here. I'll be hosting a session today, walking you over, IRM, asking a couple questions back to Robert and Micah. Currently, I lead the U.S. sales operations of Synergy Advisors. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for some time now and happy to be here today. So I'll just jump into the next slide where we can start discussing a little bit about IRM and the agenda over here, just overview. What we'll be doing today is pretty much giving you a couple examples and real scenarios that Robert and Micah have faced in the past. How, they will walk us over how they have fixed some of those tips and gotchas that they have out of those situations from insider risks that they have had. And then we'll just jump into comprehending a little bit more how IRM works, how Microsoft Purview can help you mitigate all those threats that are coming from within your organization. It might be sometimes coming from your employees and your collaborators, which is totally normal. It's sometimes intentional, it's sometimes it isn't. So that's really what we want to discuss today, and then we'll jump at the end of the hour with some Q&A. So please feel free to share your comments here, any questions that you might have. So jumping into IRM now, I guess where we really want to start is, a foundational level of what insider risk management really is. So I'll just, I want to ask Micah right now, is there a chance that you can give us a brief overview of what this is, how it works, and why this is relevant?
Yeah, of course. So broadly, insider risk management is a set of solutions that enable you to detect and to protect against, as Stephanie mentioned, malicious and also inadvertent undesirable behavior from your internal employees and users. So many of our security and compliance strategies look at keeping external threats out. However, insider risk management, and it's also acronym is IRM, it looks to mitigate some of those calls that come from within the house. According to a recent survey, for example, 69% of organizations were breached due to an insider threat, and that number is only likely to increase with the rise of the decentralized workplace.
Thank you. That's great. Then I guess now that we have a foundational level of understanding, we can jump right into real case scenarios that we have here. So, we have some very key lessons learned across the experience that we have had out there in the real world. Robert, would you mind, walking us over a couple of those scenarios that you have faced in the past?
Sure. So I wasn't directly involved with this one, but this one's a pretty famous event that occurred. So it was a slide dog gang. This is if you've ever heard of the email where people talk about it had the title The Good Stuff. This is where that comes from. So what happened was there was a group of employees leaving a manufacturer. They wanted to take all their IP with them. Now, they were collecting that IP for quite a while. And what they were doing was they were emailing out a variety of things, and they were sorting out the items that were important by entitling them the good stuff. They were grabbing all of the information they could and actually going to a competitor, which was at the time knowingly collecting this data. Um, it it get a little funny because someone made a slight mistake. They sent back one of the emails to an old address after they left. And what happened was that the company now knew that information had been leaked. So they started researching and identified that they had had an insider group working them for quite a while. And it ended up being a massive series of lawsuits that went on for quite a while. And I'm sure you can look up this one. This one is very, very public. It's really sad, but understand that this happens all the time. Customers or competitors will be talking to your employees and they're like, hey, do you want to come work with us? And they try to bring things. The most common item people leave with is customer databases. Now, I just want to point out that that could be a PII breach, so GDPR, CCPA, things like that. But at the same time, it could be confidential information, designs, plans, that type of thing, real IP, like with the Slide Dog Gang. Micah, do you want to tell us about one of yours?
Yeah, sure. So, sort of similar to your story, Robert, there's an organization that was involved in creating a brand new product. They're working in development. This is a new product that had never been built out before. This is a brand new offering for the organization. And an employee was recruited, similar to your scenario there, by a competitive organization, got hired on. This employee gave notice to the original company, and right after giving notice, downloaded hundreds, thousands of files about that research that he could then take to the competitive organization. And that data compromised about a loss of $1.5 million to the company's overall bottom line. So we're talking about real numbers. We're talking about real stakes for these organizations. And also, the other thing I want to point out from this example is that notice the timing of when this data exfiltration happened. It happened at the time that that user gave his notice and was moving on to another organization. So to some degree, the events that precipitate these data exfiltration events can be predictable. There are certain times in the employee user lifecycle that we need to take extra care to extra vigilance in uncovering their activities.
Yeah, that's a real common issue. People leaving and they're not really looking at where things are going from there. So this is a story that I was directly involved in. It's so sad and interesting, and it really surrounds around the fact that everyone talks about personas. They talk about the compliance and privacy professionals. They talk about the legal team, what they really need to work with there. They talk about HR and security. You know what personas they leave out? They leave out their employees. So one of the problems you'll sometimes run into is you will have employees that want to get things done, that want to be the best, that really want to change the game, and they want to be successful. Well, this story, I'm going to talk about the Weekend Overachiever. This was a young woman who was very excited about her position. She was working for a defense contractor. She was working on design work, bills of material, things like that, really going deep. And the company was not letting her work on the weekends because they were having a lot of changes going on at the time. Oddly enough, security upgrades. Just going to say it was a little late. They didn't really communicate the policies to the employees. The company was really in the category of, well, we've locked everything down. But what they didn't take into effect was they hire very smart people to design and build things. And you hire people who are excited to work on projects, right? Well, in this case, what happened was they had a loophole. You could take the extension of a file and change it to .mp3, and you were able to copy it back and forth to a cell phone. The only thing that was able to be copied were MP3s. I don't know why none of the other audio files at the time were not allowed, but they were not. MP3 was. Well, this young woman decided she had to work that weekend. She had to get done, and so she copied all of her design work onto MP3, put them on her phone, took them home, put it on her computer, installed the software, the design software that her company used on her local computer at home, and got to work, and then brought it back. Well, she got her work done. The problem here is technically there's an argument as to whether or not that was actually even a criminal offense, not just someone trying to get things done. But in reality, it wasn't really communicated to. They didn't really explain what she was allowed to do, what she was not. And so she decided to get things done. She was an overachiever. Now, the funniest thing about this is when I work with insider risk management tools, changing file types is a very big deal because of events like this. And in the last year, I have had multiple people request us to just let MP3s go. Literally calling them MP3s. And I just had to explain that this is a very bad idea. This isn't something you should not look at because you can do this and be done. So when you're planning your insider risk program, when you're looking at your insider risk, you're not just looking at people trying to steal. Sometimes you're trying to look at people who are trying to get things done, trying to be successful. So get all the personas, not just the big four that everybody focuses on. Micah, do you have another one?
Yeah, I've got one more here. So in this scenario, we had an employee who was having some difficulties with formatting a particular spreadsheet. He's trying to do his job. He's trying to do it well. There's something that's a little bit tricky. So he sends it on to his wife for some assistance. And he sends that spreadsheet over to her. She receives it on a social email platform. She, of course, receives it on an unmanaged device, not being part of the organization. And she goes in and helps him with the formatting issues that he's worried about. The problem is, of course, that this spreadsheet contains sensitive PII information for 36,000 of the employees' coworkers. This happened in November. It took the organization until January to find out that this had happened, that they had had a data leak of all of this PII information, and then to mitigate it, to investigate it, and to try and control the leak. So according to a Microsoft study, they found that when you're talking about insider risks, about 50% of them come from known malicious actors, but also 50% come from these types of scenarios that I'm sharing now and that Robert shared as well. Inadvertent users, maybe they make a mistake, maybe they circumvent the controls. They're generally trying to do the right thing and increase their productivity, but they make a choice that decreases the overall security and compliance of the organization. In this case, what happened at the end, it doesn't sound like any of that information ever did get out that we know of. However, this story did make the news. There were, of course, reputational risks at stake there, and the company provided free credit monitoring to the employees involved for the course of 2 years. So a light financial risk there in those terms, but also the larger risk of the reputation and the goodwill at large that can also impact those bottom lines.
A real common one. Reputational damage is huge. Alrighty, so now we're going to talk about the extra money. This was a real case I worked on. There were no insider risk controls in place, and there was a customer that was a large manufacturer. Intellectual property in the case of firmware files were being stolen, and it was really hard for this company to compete. It was like their competitors were always a step ahead. Well, the reason they were a step ahead was for years there was an employee that was working in IT. He would just take the files of all the betas and ship them out to their competitor. Just quick email, here you go, here you go, here you go, and he'd get paid. Now, he did this for an insanely long time. He made one mistake that got him caught. He had created a share, his own drive array in a group of SANs that he stored all the files he was sharing out. Now, this would never have been found because he managed them. But when he was not there, there was a SAN failure and they did a recovery. And yes, he backed up his own share, and people were trying to figure out why he had this little share that nobody knew about. Interestingly enough, you might think it's easy to get rid of an employee like that you're able to actually take them, get rid of them, turn them into the police, get them arrested or get them sued, whatnot. It depends on where the employees are located. In this case, that person got 3 months of severance pay because that was mandatory by law. Understand that you need to plan for the long game when you're dealing with insider risk. Plan for what you're going to do, what you need to do, and get to know what the rules are where you're going to be doing them. And really, we all know people are always looking for extra money. This is a time where prices are skyrocketing, things are changing, the economy is not something that we're all really happy with. So insider risk right now, for someone like this case, the extra money is a real concern. How can you protect yourself? Well, I know Mike is going to go into that a little bit more, but if you don't have a program running, get it running. Micah, I think it's back to you, my friend.
Yeah, so what are some of the lessons that we can learn from these use cases, from other stories that we've learned along our years of working with organizations in compliance? We took down 5 that I think we'd like to highlight here for you today, and I'll just talk about the very first one here. Perfect is the enemy of good. You don't have to deploy a solution that's perfect the first time out. Within the worlds of Microsoft and Synergy advisors, we like to say crawl, walk, and run. It'd be great to get it right the first time, but the reality is that most organizations don't have the resources to design and implement something that's going to cover every single use case right as they're rolling something out. So don't plan that way. Understand that you can, with a subset of that effort, address some of the top, let's say, 3 concerns that you have in the organization. Maybe that's looking at 3 distinct pieces of sensitive information, like PII information or credit card data, and then working from there. So make sure that if you are resource constrained, as most organizations are, you can put these deployments out in stages, so that you can focus on what is going to be the maximum impact to your organization, test that, validate it, and then you can move on to what's next. What are the next sets of most important use cases that we can solve from there? It can be a living, breathing deployment. It can be a living and breathing design as you get input, as you have the resourcing available to roll these solutions out. And wherever possible, of course, take advantage of some of those machine learning AI services that are going to be able to perform aspects of that job on your behalf as well.
Perfect is the enemy of good. And the first thing I always tell my customers is if you're going to do nothing else in your compliance software and you do buy the Microsoft suite, just turn insider risk on. Just turn it on. It'll try to help you find that next step. It won't build you your campaign, but it'll give you something. And that leads me to the next piece, which is don't ignore context. So insider risk events are rarely, hey, I'm stealing a file and I leave. There's usually more things going on. And sometimes it'll be I'm trying to get help on something. Sometimes it'll be the Weekend Overachiever. Sometimes it'll be the extra money. You don't know. Quite often, it's inadvertent risk. But when it's somebody going out for extra money or someone like the Sly Dog King, there's going to be pieces. You're going to see a trend occurring. If you have a system in place and it can watch for those trends, you're going to be more effective. You're going to find events that really occur and be able to filter out ones that don't. Back to you, Micah.
Yeah, in that vein, we don't have to focus only on, or we shouldn't actually focus only on malicious threats. Not every threat to your organization's data is going to look like some plot out of a James Bond film or something like that. As we mentioned, this is backed by studies that Microsoft has performed. About half of the insider risks that an organization will encounter come from members of their organization that did not mean to be malicious. They're just doing something to help do their job better, whether that's intentionally circumventing controls or whether that's a mistake that they've made, whether that's a lack of knowledge around their compliance and information protection handling standards. None of those things are uncommon. We work with a lot of organizations that have for example, a classification taxonomy, that have an information protection handling document that map specific behaviors to specific sets of sensitivity within the organization. It's also very common for us to encounter organizations that those documents, while they're published, while they're available, they're not widely known or used within the organization. Maybe you have a compliance training when you enter the organization, but there's no reference back to it. There's no technical controls to back it up. There's no emphasis on information protection handling outside of the initial training that you receive, or maybe an annual update to the training. So remember that we're not just focused on malicious users. We're also looking at users that are exfiltrating data through negligence, through circumventing the controls, or something like that.
Which leads us straight to personas. You know the type of personas you have in your company. You need to remember the big four, the HR, security, your privacy team, really your primary group that you normally deal with, right? And don't forget the legal. But at the same time, think about, do you have weekend overachievers? Do you have people that have very specific personas that you can actually plan and deal with? And I'm not saying deal with bad ways, just know what they are so you can create a posture and policies that fit those people. I will tell you, not every company is the same. Don't think that a cookie cutter approach is going to work. It's got to be your company's approach, which leads us straight to number 5. Consider motivations. What kind of motivations are you really concerned about? And now, for those of you who've come to compliance from security or whoever play on both sides, you'll know the term tabletop. Well, you need to take some of these personas, throw them to your team, and say, hey, can you break these policies and get away with it? You need to game the system, document the goals, document what you're going to do, and go and try and see what the results are. See what type of information you get back. And then you can really figure out if you can make a system that's going to protect you. And the answer to that, by the way, is yes, you will be able to do it. But you've got to take in all 5 of these components. You got to remember, perfect is the enemy of good. Get something out there. All else fails, just turn it on. Don't ignore context. Don't focus only on malicious threats. The fact of the matter is, so much out there is accidental and inadvertent. It's not even funny. I will tell you from the privacy perspective, the vast majority of privacy breaches have absolutely nothing to do with malicious intent. Go back to the personas. Who's at your company? And then consider motivations and game them. Test them out. Try to put yourself in the the position of those employees, of those people. Um, Now, Micah, could you give us a little bit of the insider risk management tools from Microsoft with some of the secret sauce from Synergy?
Yeah, absolutely. So what can you do about some of these insider risks? Well, insider risk management, or IRM, is not just a category of threats. It's also a service provided by Microsoft under the Purview compliance umbrella. So IRM can look through your user's Microsoft 365 behavior. It can establish a baseline for that particular user, and then it can use the machine learning algorithm to look for discrepancies, to look for exceptional activities within the context of a particular user. So just like Robert was saying, you can turn on Insider Risk Manager. It starts to scan through your organization and establish that baseline. It's getting in signals from all of the different Microsoft 365 services, such as Microsoft DLP through the activities that are in Office 365, such as you're downloading from SharePoint. It's inputting signals from Azure Active Directory, from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, across all of these different Microsoft 365 services. They're feeding into insider risk management so that we can see spikes in a user's behavior and then start to investigate them. Everything that I'm talking about is all on the back end. It's all on the administrative side. At this point, we're not touching the end users. It's a very easy service to go in, enable, and review the results that we're seeing. We can surface up legitimate alerts and cases to a compliance officer or someone equivalent in the organization so that they can go in and investigate further. So you can see one particular example of that would be the data leaks scenario. This is a policy that's built into IRM that you can turn on. It's feeding signals from data exfiltration events. Maybe that's a high amount of downloads from SharePoint Online. So just, as an example, my name is Micah. I'm logging in every day in my organization from Seattle. I'm downloading between 5 and 15 documents a day. My normal sign-in hours, my normal sign-in location, the normal state of my device, my activity within Office 365, and then all of a sudden, one day I come in and I start downloading hundreds of files from SharePoint Online. We capture some signals from Defender for Endpoint on some of the DLP exfiltration events, like maybe I'm emailing them to a social credentials, or I'm copying them to a remote or to a USB file storage. Maybe I'm printing them. We're taking all of that input and saying, hey, machine, based on our pattern for Micah previously, this looks like a data exfiltration event. So let's surface this up to an administrator to look at in more greater detail. Insider risk management can also connect to your HR applications so that you can surface additional focus, additional vigilance on a particular user based on one of those triggers that we talked about. Insider risk threats rarely come out of nowhere. They're usually preceded by some triggering event, whether that's a bad performance review, whether that's did not get a promotion, whether that's they decided to leave the organization. These are all trigger events that can then lead to some of these data exfiltration actions that we've discussed. So you can incorporate insider risk management with your HR systems so that you can find those high-risk users and then be able to investigate them further. Then I also want to talk briefly about a new feature within insider risk management called adaptive protection. And this is now where we start to change the experience of the end user based on the user risk that is found within IRM. This is a feature that's available now in public preview. You can turn this on and take a look at it. It incorporates different actions to DLP policies based on that user risk. So we could have two users here that we see. They could be trying to share the same document. They could be scoped to the same DLP policies, but their experience as they try and send a document outside the organization, or however the DLP policy rule is configured, their experience on triggering that DLP rule will be different depending on their risk. So you can see We may have one user with minor risk who sends that information along. There's nothing that's been odd about that user's behavior according to the machine learning algorithms over the past couple of weeks. So that user is notified, hey, it looks like you're trying to send sensitive information outside the organization. Now contrast that with another user who has had behavior over the past couple of weeks that we do consider to be risky. Maybe it's that high number of downloads from SharePoint. Maybe it's something going on with the identity or the device. Some other aspects of this user's behavior have led IRM to categorize this user as high risk. And then once categorized, we can, at that point, block some of these data exfiltration options based on the same policy. So two different experiences based on how risky that user is according to insider risk management. Okay, so to summarize for insider risk management as part of Microsoft's compliance suite is something that you can go in, turn on immediately, start establishing a baseline for your organization, start seeing what comes back, start seeing some of the different data exfiltration events that IRM can report on. Then you can start to establish that baseline and then investigate users from there. At SERGY Advisors, as Stephanie mentioned, we help with consulting. We help with design and deployment of compliance solutions such as insider risk management. We've also developed our own set of solutions that build on top of Microsoft 365 capabilities for different use cases that we've seen. And I just want to take you briefly through our eVigilant solution and how that can help in the compliance space in the case of insider risk management. So what eVigilant can do is it can integrate with different Microsoft 365 workloads and look for different triggering events that come out of those services and then kick off some form of workflow. So you can see a couple of examples here on the screen about what we can do within eVigilant. But actually the first use case that we thought of that led us to build eVigilant was in the compliance space, was with data loss prevention. So I'm going to go one more here. So in the case of DLP projects, we've seen a lot of DLP projects of varying degrees of success just because the system finds the information, returns it back to the IT admins who then don't have the requisite context to understand what's a false positive and what is something legitimate that they should surface on to their superiors, to the compliance officer or whoever that might be. There's a lack of context to the violation that really is a key part in understanding how the data should move within the organization. So within the context of DLP, we can, on the eVigilant side, find an event from DLP. Microsoft DLP discovers the sensitive information, acts on it as it normally would, whether that's to block it, whether that's to alert the administrator, whether that's to notify the end user. eVigilant can grab that event and then kick off a workflow from there. I'm going to show you an example of one of those workflows here. So here we have a user that's tried to send sensitive information outside the organization. You can see this was a credit card number, and Microsoft DLP has found the credit card number and blocked the message to that was supposed to go externally. Now, eVigilant captures that event from Microsoft DLP and then can kick off the workflow. So in this case, the workflow is first to notify the end user and ask the end user to justify what they were doing. Hey, we noticed that you tried to send a credit card information outside the organization. That's a violation of our compliance protocols. Please help us understand, why were you trying to send this information outside the organization? And we can deliver that alert through email or through our eBot, which is through Microsoft Teams, direct integration with Microsoft Teams. So here we can see some of those cases from eVigilant where I can come in, provide my justification, provide the reasons why I was trying to send that credit card number outside the organization in this case. So you can see the justification there in the bottom left that I've left here. And I click justify. So from the perspective of the author of this sensitive information, this workflow is complete. Now, in the second part of the workflow that we're using for this particular example, now we're going to check in with this user's manager. So we can't necessarily trust the end user to provide an honest justification. In the examples that Robert and I shared, some of those were of malicious intent. Some of those were circumventing controls. We can't necessarily rely on the good word of our end users. Let's trust but verify. Send that information on to our user's manager. Same mechanism. We can send that through Microsoft Teams, or we can send that through email. And we can say, hey, one of your employees was attempting to send this credit card number outside the organization. So skip through this here. There we are. So here's the email sent to the manager. Now the manager is able to come in and say, and the manager has the context to say, hey, yeah, this is okay. This is part of the user's daily activities, or this is an exception case. We're working with a new partner. That's on the good side. On the negative side, maybe this is a malicious event. Maybe the user has just given notice to the manager. Maybe the manager knows that this person has been interviewing around and says, hey, this might be a legitimate threat to data exfiltration. We need to investigate this further. We need to bring in a compliance officer or someone of that ilk to be able to investigate this incident further. So by bringing in the user, by bringing in the manager in this case, we can provide that additional context back up to IT so that we can more easily ignore the false positives, but we can also, more importantly, surface those real events, those events that we need to take seriously that might be the start of a pattern of data exfiltration by one of our inside users. And also, within the context of eVigilant, we can provide tracking for this information. So we can start to establish a pattern of behavior as well. So in this case, maybe the manager takes a look at this new incident from a particular user, wants to go back and see, okay, how many of these incidents have we had before? I remember hearing that this user was trying to exfiltrate PII information only a month ago. That can be a signal to our manager to maybe send that user over to our compliance training, or maybe to kick it over to the compliance officer for further investigation. So more robust reports around context within, in this case, DLP rules. And with that, I'll send it back to Stephanie.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Micah, for, providing us an overview of what IRM is, and also even further, how we can actually start acting against all those threats that we're having inside of our organization. Now we'll jump back into Q&A. Let's start with one of the questions that we have here in our public chat. We have here, how do you address customer criticism of IRM? An example he's giving here is that it might not detect 100% of the exfil attempts immediately. By the time it does, they could already be out the door accepting a bribe. So either Robert or Micah, what would you guys respond to this question here?
So this is one of those issues that you'll run into when you're trying to make sure that you are enabling business while also protecting your company. So you're trying to track for events. That could be converting multiple items, things like that. You need things to be adaptive. The fact of the matter is, if it's a one and done, unless it's something you have on a DLP policy, you're probably not going to stop it. Are you going to stop something more like the slide dog gang where you're getting multiple items? Yes. But you need to make sure that you have controls put in place. So you need that combination of insider risk management and DLP. Micah, would you like to add anything to that? Or have a different take?
No, I agree with you completely. And I think you can tell through the adaptive protection controls that we're talking about previously that Microsoft is really going towards being able to act on those signals that are being inputted through IRM, through some of the other Microsoft 365 controls. The other aspect that I'll say is that insider risk management should not be deployed by itself. It's not the only control that you have around finding and protecting yourself against insider risks. It can be used in conjunction with additional tools across Microsoft 365, other tools within the compliance suite, as well as controls within Azure Active Directory and on the device.
Now, I do want to add something in. We are talking about the M365 Insider Risk Management tools today. However, understand that when we talk about those, we are talking about a tool that does reach out beyond the Microsoft platform. It reaches into multiple platforms. It's very much designed to reach into the desktop. It's very much designed to be reaching throughout into other services outside. So just like our DLP products, it is not only something that will work in Microsoft. Do not think that. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, guys. That's great. And please, for those who are attending the session, feel free to, shoot all your questions there in the Q&A set of the live event. Then jumping into the next one over here, I'm seeing here, I guess this might be one question to what you were referring to, Robert, earlier around all the personas that we should be looking at. So the question is, why do you say we don't look at enough personas? And then what really is a persona that we should be looking at beyond those 4 that you were presenting to us?
So you need to look at the personas of your employees. Look at your employees. What type of people do you have working for you? What type of people is HR looking for and hiring? You need to understand what their wants and needs are. I will tell you that I've ran into all sorts. I ran into an environment where people would send out emails of files that they were working on because they liked how Word looked on their old computer, not the computer that's managed by IT. It sounds weird, but this was a big deal. I'll throw out another one that to worry about. The fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people who, for some reason, the most common photo I will ever find in an environment are wedding photos. People will take all their wedding photos and they will put it on their work computers. You have to understand that that's happening if it's happening. Really look into it. You need to look into how you're storing your files. Are you keeping data for decades? I was in an environment once where I had a customer. He was helping me go through a migration. He got fairly upset because he found a directory with a bunch of personal notes from his mom. Well, his mom had died over 10 years before, but had worked for the same company. But they just left it there in a share, didn't purge it out, nothing like that. And he's seen some things he probably didn't want to see. Brought up a lot of bad memories. He's no longer with that company. But you needed to understand both his mom's persona and his persona. Really look at your employees, because here's the thing. Your employees are going to want to get their job done. End of statement. If you are going to stop that, they will find a way around it. So understand your employees, how they will look at that, how they will go around issues. Stephanie?
That is true. That is true. I agree with you. And that happens very often that we might be overlooking those who we think, might not be the ones that incur this kind of incidents, but we know how it is. We've seen the stories here. So it's always, if we can share a tip here and a recommendation here is make sure you're going beyond that, the stereotype of those 4 personas that should be looking at. Thank you, Robert, for responding that one. Guess another one that we have here is, for you guys, now that you provided the overview on IRM and how can we start, from your point of view, what is the first thing that we should do if we have none of this set up right now? You want to start, Micah, with that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to do would be to kick off that initial scan within Insider Risk Management. Takes only up to a couple of days. Real low impact to your end users, low resource allocation necessary to just turn it on and start establishing a baseline for your organization. As a next step, I would try to look through your organization and understand the top, say, 3 use cases that you're really looking to solve with Insider Risk Manager tools, and then start planning out how you can achieve that subset, and then go from there.
Yeah, when you turn it on first, things change. But just understand that. And that is, once that happens, things are a lot simpler. You'll see events. The other thing is, if you are using M365, you've got the environment set up, go in and make sure your sensitive information system is cataloging. It takes a global admin. It's literally one click to turn on. And you would not believe how many environments I've went into that did not have that one click made. So there was no scanning, no identifying of personalized or personal information. And that also meant that if you've got the full suite, you're not identifying all of those neat things like business contract, design documents, codes, credentials. They're not being scanned if you don't click the button. Click the button. It goes back to everything else I say. Just turn it on. That's the first thing. Turn it on and things will actually start collecting. And actually, M365 is neat because you let it run a couple of weeks and it will actually announce, like, hey, this is what we think you should turn on. It'll do that in DLP. It'll do that in Insider Risk. And there's training videos in Insider Risk. It doesn't just say do it. It says, hey, you should do this next. And do you want to watch the video instructions? Very simple, very straightforward.
That's
Now,
true. 100%.
you have a lot more with your add-in, Stephanie, than just turning on. You've got such deep analytics going on. That could be a huge win for a lot of companies as well.
That is true. Thank you, Robert. That it's pretty much easy wins, as we like to call them. Easy wins that start by turning it on and then take it from there. It's, it's easy wins. And we do have another question over here coming from one of the attendees, and it is, how can we quickly scale, guys, the detection of possible internal risks in an organization of more than 2,000 employees? What would you recommend, guys, based on your experience?
Micah, why don't you start this one?
Well, the first thing to talk about there is the machine learning algorithm that's provided by Insider Risk Manager. So that's really taking a lot of the heavy lifting off your shoulders. You don't have to investigate for specific threats. You can leverage that user's baseline and those exceptional scenarios that Insider Risk Manager finds. You can incorporate IRM with those Microsoft 365 applications as discussed. So I would leverage as many of those integrations as possible through DLP, through MDE, and on down the list. That way you're getting the maximum signal over to Insider Risk Management, and you can leverage that AI aspect to be able to raise those up.
If you take and turn everything on, it really doesn't make much difference if you're 2,000 or 10,000 users. You can rapidly scale it up by turning it on and just following the recommendations on the screen. You are not going in there, you're not breaking things. You are enabling the system to do what it was designed to do. It's not going to slow things down. The next thing that I really recommend is make sure you're taking those logs and dropping them into Sentinel and utilizing the features there as well. All of these things that we have, they all collect, they all go together, they all give a broader picture. So that's where I would start. And then as you go on, add in rules, put them in test, make sure that you're using the adaptive controls, that you're utilizing the endpoint piece, and just start watching what is happening. You'll get these notifications. It'll say, you have a lot of this. Maybe you have a lot of financial records in your environment. So you want to set up controls for that. That's really where you're at, piece by piece.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. We hope that it was, these gadgets that we shared, common examples, common scenarios that we found out there might be helpful for you. I guess the message here is if you don't have IRM turned on and you do have access to that, let's go over easy wins. Let's go step by step. Perfect is the enemy of good. That's certainly one of another key message that we'll like to share with you guys today. Feel free to reach out to us, either Robert, Micah, or myself. We're more than happy to either walk you over how IRM works, how there's a better together story with synergies e-vigilant. Happy to walk you over that. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Looking forward to our next. Thank you to Robert and Micah for your time today, guys, and for walking us over all of this. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one.